This is it, the final run. Luckily, I bring into this viewing the helpful comments from last video, many of which were mad at me that I didn't understand the floating orb was a homunculus. No, I understand that, it's just from how it's been told. It seems to me it also has to be a lot more than just a homunculus. The other big one was the mark of blood at Briggs, which does make a lot of sense now that it's been explained to me. My confusion there was that I thought since only now the entire circle was complete, there would have to be further massacres at all the important sites along it to actually complete it. It didn't occur to me that all the bloodshed from like decades prior would still count, which is pretty dumb considering how long it probably took to dig the tunnel. I think those were the big ones. Very useful to have a comment section full of people to help you out or imply you were dropped on your head as a child for misunderstanding things. As I've said, it's a dense show. There's a lot going on. I believe on a first watch through, it's only natural to miss some things, fail to connect some dots. Hopefully now, when I'm done watching this final batch, all will come together. I think it's got a lot to do and enough time to do it, but it's close, so let's finish it off. The ending opening, we're finally here. With this, we can finally decide the order from best to worst, which obviously reads as this: 2 by a lot, and then 1 by a pretty decent amount, and then 4, and then 5, and then a giant gaping chasm to finish it out with 3. That being said, none of them are bad per se, that's just my taste, and OP5 being second last on the list doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, it's pretty good. There's a lot to like this time, especially in the direction of it. Small side note first though, is this tree really important overlooking the city? It's been around before, but I'm not sure what it means. Winry's here in the first half of this opening, and then Dubai's are here again at the end, and they were of course here in OP2 as well. Like, does the tree represent home and then they look out over the evil, corrupt city maybe? Back in OP2 it was raining while they were here, and then the sun came out, which happens again in this one, which of course you know coming into this video I love because it puts a beautiful bookend on the theme of Edward reaching out for his mother, as in all of the other openings near the beginnings he reaches out for his mother or the heavens, etc. And then to close out the final one, the clouds part, the sun comes out, and the visage of his mother is finally reaching back for him. I've never been more right. God, it was electric seeing that. I've never been that high. Sorry, I'll chill. It's kind of interesting that the opening shows it's pouring down rain for the entirety of the last arc's events. Of course, before the sun comes out and everyone is filled with hope, and the symbolism is clearly that we are in our most downtrodden, desperate moments here where things are looking their worst, but light will still prevail. Yeah, it's all lovely. But then during the show, despite the coup, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, where buildings are exploding, many people are dying, there's about to be a human sacrifice on an unimaginable scale, all this terrible shit happening, but it's a beautiful day for it. You think Father's plans would have been thwarted if it was cloudy that day and you couldn't see the eclipse? Anyway, yeah, visually, despite the colors being so downtrodden because of the choice to set it in the rain, I think this might be my favorite opening just based on visuals alone. Like, clearly these shots from OP2 were the best for me, but overall, I think this one might take it. It's just got a lot of sauce. The choice to light the first shot almost like we're back in episode 1 is a cool one, back on the rooftops, because we've learned so much. And it seems the ice guy alchemist from all the way back then was actually working with a lot of the same interests that the main cast has now. It's almost like it's come full circle. I like the shot a lot with Father and the homunculi erupting from Hoenheim. The red and blue good and evil imagery continues as well. I think the shot of the dwarf's eye, seeing all of the future sacrifices as foreshadowing to the fact that the 5th sacrifice will be Mustang, is a very clever and really cool looking shot. And I've noticed that these openings don't really depict exact situations that take place in the show, but it still shows us circumstances that will come up, like who will face who in a fight, and I think that's just the right amount of keeping things on topic without giving away too much. I like that a lot. A close-up on Mustang's eye as he spirals into the void because truth takes his vision. Wow, there's a lot to really like in this opening from an art direction. It's pretty sweet. Honestly, maybe it jumps to number 3 on my list just because of that. I don't know, they're close. The only part I can't really find anything to decipher for is the shot of Winry looking like truth. I'm not quite sure what that's referencing or could mean. It's clear Edward is reaching for her, but as he does, he recoils and his colors fade away. It could be referring to Edward's love for Winry, but he knows loving someone as deeply as he loved his mother can lead to feelings of horrible loss, and that's why she looks like truth. What do you guys think? That's the only bit I'm kind of wondering on. All in all, pretty solid opening, just like the rest of them. This show does openings right. Okay, with the opening out of the way, I gotta see if I can put the ending into words. Like, plot-wise, let's see if I actually understood what was going on. This is a very dense show, and like I said, I don't think missing things here and there and missing connections you're supposed to make on a first viewing is anything to be ashamed of, so I'm not embarrassed to admit that I had to go back and watch the last handful of episodes again to really figure out what was happening. Okay, let me break it down like I'm one of those ending explain channels, except I don't know for sure if I'm actually right. I imagine I'll have at least some of it wrong. So Father sacrificed Xerxes and placed all of the souls of that population in himself and Hoenheim, 50% each. There's also an enormous Philosopher's Stone beneath the Mestris, which he's plugged into a lot of the time, that I assume also had to be made during that interaction because I'm not sure where it came from otherwise. That giant Philosopher's Stone is tied to the magic of all Amestrian alchemy, giving Father the ability to choose who can transmute while they're near him. Okay, that's the setup. The actual plan is to make a big circle, have it drawn out and completed by committing acts of giant violence at key points along it, and have Sloth dig an actual physical circle. All of that by the time a solar eclipse happens. The solar eclipse is important because the sun and the moon represent the male and female form, so when the two come together, they represent a perfect being, or God, as we learn. God and truth are the same being. Father also starts to talk about some Gaia theory stuff, where the Earth is actually a living organism, and that is important for some reason, and I'll be honest, I don't really know why that's important, but he mentions it once and then never again, but it is in there. So Father's plan is to use the big circle along with the 5 sacrifices, who will have to be truth seers. Not entirely clear on why that's the case, but I guess it's just because this is a very special transmutation. The sacrifices, even though they're called sacrifices, are not actually killed during this process, they just need to be present. The people that are actually sacrificed is the entire population of Amestris this time. All of their souls leave their bodies. These souls are used in the transaction with truth, and as Mustang says, there are about 50 million of them, which is enough of a toll on the equivalent exchange meter that Father can open up a gate to the truth zone, to the real world, and absorb truth into himself and become all-powerful. I suppose that means because he absorbs truth, he actually keeps all of the souls he just sacrificed anyway. So basically, he's an untouchable god now. However, Hoenheim has a counter strategy. Hoenheim has left Philosopher's Stones of his own creation, using the souls of the people of Xerxes he has within him to create them, and has left them along the edges of what will be the moon's shadow that will be cast upon the earth when the eclipse happens, giving him another enormous circle that he can transmute with. He uses this immediately after Father executes his plan, and uses those souls to somehow spiritually damage Father in yet another massive transmutation. So much so that Father is forced to release a massive amount of the Amestrian souls, though not all of them, leaving him to still be hugely powerful but not godlike. Scar then uses alchemy, which is not fundamentally tied to the style of alchemy used in Amestris, and thus unaffected by Father's philosopher's boulder he has hidden underground, to use another enormous circle, this time as something called a reverse transmutation circle, which is this unique design we keep seeing, to turn off Father's control on who gets to transmute around him, meaning that Debize can actually fight him. A combination of Father being unable to contain the power of truth housed within him without all the Amestrian souls to power him, and an unrelenting series of attacks from the main cast, as well as an incredibly weird play by Greed. I didn't know he could use the impenetrable shield thing in reverse. All adds up to Father finally being defeated. Wow, that was a lot to keep up with in the final 3 or 4 episodes it was all jammed into. Okay, so I know I probably missed a factor or two or misunderstood something, but I think those are all the broad strokes. And for what it is, I think that adds up to a pretty cool final conflict and solution. With that being said though, as you know with this channel, nothing I ever review has ever been purely positive or purely negative, not even Avatar. So yeah, despite liking it after wrapping my head around it, I do still have some problems with it. My main one being the pacing of these last 15 episodes. I was really surprised to see that the final quarter of this show is all one ongoing conflict. It's all the sacking of the capital and the military movement around it, as well as the more intimate moments between our characters and the actual bad guys. And for the first, I want to say over half of the season, it's really just military minutia happening, while our main characters are set up to be in scenes of high tension, but we only really ever revisit them for moments at a time, and those scenes aren't pushed much further in those moments. I was really surprised with how much had to be revealed, that the show took its time so much in actually getting to the reveal. And then when we finally do get to all of the big bombshells being dropped, we've only got 4 episodes to reveal them, hope the audience can keep up with them, and then do the big battle. And I think it all comes back to the fact that while the scale and stakes of the conflict are enormous, the story is that the bad guy has to jump through all these hoops to complete their goal, which are largely kept in secret and thus don't take up much time code. And really the main cast goal is to get to the main villain and stop him. And at this point in the story, you can only put so many speed bumps in front of them, so the military stuff eats up a lot of these last episodes. And I'm gonna be honest, man, I don't care about Buccaneer dying. I don't care about Brad's wife at the radio station. It's cool that all these elements are involved and the story brings back a ton of stuff from earlier in the show, but man, give me more of Ling and Greed versus Brad, or Scar versus Brad, or more Alphons in general. This show has built up some really solid characters that I really do like, but I found it a bit disappointing that when everything is coming to a head, we only get precious few seconds with each one of them in the episodes leading up to the end. Like the Sloth stuff, him versus the Armstrongs takes up more time in a couple of episodes than we see Edward dealing with the homunculus soldiers. And while there are elements I like about that conflict, like I don't know how they did it, but eventually the Armstrong just being fucking yoked and flexing joke did break me down. I ended up liking it. And I do like the idea behind Sloth is that he's actually the fastest of the homunculi, and the sloth element of his character is that he's usually too lazy to actually use that speed. I kept finding myself thinking, man, it seems like there's still a lot to solve in the main plot that this screen time could be getting used for. And I do still think that, but at the same time, with how the final battle is set up, really with how the entire series is set up, I don't really know how you do these reveals to take up more of the time code. Really, the show is a mystery when it comes down to it. The entire show is all about what the hell is going on behind the scenes and pulling at threads, and the characters trying to piece together what the hell is going on before it happened. And they only get so far in that pursuit. They figure out a pretty decent chunk of it, but by the time the eclipse comes around, there's still a lot to have to find out and figure out how to understand, but only a couple things left for Father to actually have to execute on. Basically, what I'm trying to say, I think if you zoom out and look at the final conflict as a whole, there's a three-way imbalance of how much information the characters and audience have, the time actually dedicated to learning and having to deal with those consequences of Father's plan, and the overall time the conflict actually takes to get going, to when things actually get down to the nitty-gritty and start mattering a lot. So now with all that being said, and all of the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood superfans have worked themselves into a frothing rage, I'm gonna say I actually like this last chunk of episodes quite a bit. A big thing that stuck out to me is that despite not being totally invested in all of the conflicts, the shows never look better. The final battle, as soon as the main cast comes face to face with Father and the ritual starts, especially that stuff, it's all very solid art and animation wise. And it took me the entire show to realize that if you just put Brad in a scene, for some reason the animators start caring a lot and want this dude to be animated as crazy as possible. And whoever has the privilege to be his opponent also gets that same treatment. Seriously, every time this dude is in a scene, it looks incredible. I wish he was in more. I had a question though, as the episodes went on. It seemed like all the other homunculi can shrug off massive damage and heal right away, unless it's a ton of sustained damage over a short period of time. Which is why I rolled my eyes a little bit when Sloth was simply punched to death by two really strong guys, but anyway. Brad seems to take damage and retain that damage, despite his homunculus status. And that confused me for a bit, but I reason now that it's because he originally was a human, and his Philosopher's Stone is probably only his own soul infused with it. The other homunculi who have a ton of them, meaning that maybe his regenerative powers are much weaker. That's how I chose to think about it, at least. I think it makes sense. Not trying to make excuses for the show or anything, but what else would the logic be, you know? And I guess while we're talking about the homunculi, we should knock the other ones off, so let's keep track. I like Brad's ending. I didn't much care for Sloth's, but then again, Sloth was the least interesting by a mile, so though I didn't like his ending, it also didn't bother me much because I didn't care. Envy is next, and I like theirs a lot. I like that with a lot of the homunculi's endings, you get a further context into why they have their name. And a lot of Envy's comes down to, even though they've been told and believe they are greater than humans for their entire existence, they still feel a jealousy towards the connections that humans can make between each other. Envy has constantly been the snarkiest, the most full of themselves, the one that underestimated and looked down on humans the most, and is called out on their actual hidden feelings of loneliness. But not just that, after being defeated by humans on multiple occasions now, has to face the fact that because of the human connections they're able to form, they are in fact many times stronger than Envy could ever hope to be. And the most toxic and sure of themselves member of the family ends up killing themselves because they just can't accept the reality that they aren't as great as they've always held themselves up to be. I think that's a wonderful and sad ending for a character that I haven't talked about much in these reviews, but overall was a villain I actually really enjoyed. I think it was a great decision to not have Envy just be defeated in the snow that one time. I think looking back on it, a decent chunk of why I didn't like that scene was that I didn't like that was how Envy was going to go out. So Envy's end, great. 10 out of 10. Would watch the little green nematode thing off itself again. Pride chomped Gluttony last season, and Gluttony getting eaten is sort of funny. Haha, nice moment. So well done. But that also makes me wonder, if Pride did that and absorbed Gluttony's sense of smell, does that also mean that Pride is now a failed portal to truth and now also has that never-ending void inside of him? Whatever, sorry. It's a bad habit of mine to just put completely random thoughts in these scripts that don't go anywhere. It's the overanalyzer in me. Pride's end is a bit of a confusing one to me. I don't really know how to feel about it. So they force human transmutation onto Mustang, and while it isn't really explained, I think doing that weakened Pride in a big way somehow. Because afterwards he's falling apart and doesn't seem to be able to fight as hard as he usually can. And because of this, Edward can overpower him, and, well, I'll just let the show say it.
Impossible! He's turned himself into a Philosopher's Stone and now he's forcing his way inside me?
You what?
And I mean, I've praised this show before about constantly looking at all of the possible angles of the magic system and reversing things and flipping things on their head, asking hard questions, having cool reveals about how the magic can work. But when Pride said this, I was completely lost. When Ed got gored earlier on, he said he could use his own life force to sort of human transmute himself and heal himself. So this using yourself as the magic thing doesn't come out of nowhere, but it still seems like a crazy pull to just be like, oh, he's doing it and using it to defeat one of your main villains. Luckily, the moment is sort of saved by, you won't believe I'm saying this, but Kimberly of all people. Kimberly is also eaten by Pride and somehow finds a way to keep his individuality and sabotages Pride from the inside as this is happening. And it's really cool to me that he only does this because Pride goes back on his way of thinking, a lot like Envy's realization that the humans did outclass them and did beat them. Pride has a similar realization and says that he will steal Edward's body since his current one is falling apart. And Kimberly and I agree that this is a hypocritical move from Pride. If you're so much better than the humans, why is it that you need to steal one of their bodies to defeat them? Aren't you Pride? Shouldn't this thought disgust you? So Kimberly's survival of the fittest mindset comes all the way back around. He suddenly sees Pride as deserving of defeat and death because he doubled back on his mindset and values. And I think this little moment from Kimberly adds a nice little flair to his character. I still don't think Kimberly was an amazing character by any stretch, but seeing that he applies his logic so broadly and so plainly and refuses to budge on it, no matter the context, no matter the side or person it applies to, adds a strange depth to his character that I can appreciate. So anyway, Pride is defeated and turned into a baby thing that's the size of your thumb for some reason. I don't know. Anyone got anything for this one? Because I don't know why. Because all the other homunculus just turn into dust, right? But then it turns out he grows up again and he seems like he's a pretty normal, nice kid, and I don't really know why. Can someone help me out on this one? Pride's ending is really, really something I'm not sure how to take or feel about. It left me more confused than anything. And finally, Greed, who as the show closed out, the combination between Greed and Ling, I found actually ended up being one of my favorite characters. It felt really natural how their dynamic evolved from being so hostile and one-sided to having them begrudgingly have to work together at points, to actively working together and actually being friends by the end. I didn't really notice how much I was liking it until the end when Greed died. Maybe that's just because Ling is a likable guy and a bad guy becoming a good guy is always a recipe to see them in a very positive light. But still, Greed is just fun. The idea that Ling poses to him that the one thing he truly wants is something that he as a homunculi should never naturally have, that being human connection, is great. Envy couldn't grasp how the humans could be greater than them for it, and Greed subconsciously pined for that connection. And in the end, he actually did end up making friends that he could count on and eventually would die for. Greed, despite his name, in the end, gave up everything for the people he connected to. Lovely. I think definitely the best out of all of them. Greed was great. Well, since we've covered all the other villains, let's round it out with Father, aka what the fuck even is it in the flask? A lot of people were upset with me that I didn't know it was homunculus last time, and as I explained, I understand that. I still do think the story sort of demands that it be more than that, though. So it's a being that's made from Hohenheim's blood, and I assume some real sideways hocus-pocus ass science or alchemy that somehow spawned this little bastard. What's damning to me is how much Father seems to know even before he's let out of the flask and gains a body. He is so informed, and even if he learns all this from being in an alchemy lab, it still seems incredibly strange to me that he could set up all the sacrifice of Xerxes under everyone's noses, including the other alchemists in Hohenheim, and just get away with it without anyone realizing, at least roughly, what he's trying to do. It seems to me he's created already having extremely esoteric knowledge of the world and the magic system, and to me, I thought that meant he was somehow something more. And I still feel like he might be, but on what level, I don't know. Him bringing up the Gaia theory stuff and the big circle plan is all reasonably stuff he put together after the sacrifice of Xerxes. No problem with that, but after he's defeated and he meets Truth, he seems utterly confused. And there's this little detail that I noticed. After Edward mentions everyone gets their own individual portal to Truth, it's that Edward's is decorated in this symbol that has to do with alchemical knowledge. Or at least I'm pretty sure that's it. There's a lot of symbols in this show. But Father's portal is completely blank, despite him definitely knowing a lot about the magic system and how the world works. And the only thing I can think of is that this is implying that though he gained knowledge and power, he did it through the wrong avenues, stole power and knowledge from others, and thus Truth doesn't recognize it as his. And Father, despite having all this power and knowledge only moments ago, seems at a total loss to why Truth didn't see or understand his greatness. He doesn't even seem to know what truth is, which I kind of think clashes with the esoteric knowledge he seemed to have to be born with. But maybe he just understands that truth or God does exist, but doesn't really understand the true nature of what it is, and that's what he's asking. I said last video that if Father did just turn out to be a largely unexplained entity, I'd be kind of disappointed in taking it in that direction, and yeah, I think that is where I sit with it. It's not like a soul-crushing disappointment, it's just what Father is and seems to be seems so interesting. To not get any further explanation on him seems a little lame to me. If you step back and look at what the story of Father is, it's that there was a monster that was created by unknown means that is super evil and wants to be all-powerful, and that's his entire origin and entire motivation. And while, don't get me wrong, I'm not above that sort of storytelling by any means. I thought thought the show was setting up more to do with it. That's all I'm saying. I think talking about the characters is going to be the vast majority of this video because, like I said, and I feel like this might be one of those things that people might not notice, the last 15 episodes of the show is really just the one big conflict that sometimes takes its time a lot and sometimes flies by at the speed of light. Let's work our way up to the main character. Since we're closing out this series, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention some tertiary characters that I didn't give much of a spotlight to before. I ended up really liking Hawkeye. I'm not sure what it is about her. It's clear that her and Mustang have a thing for each other, but I think it's really endearing that they're both so professional and have such a history together and have such a respect for each other that neither of them even really hint at liking one another. But it still comes across that there probably is more than just a friendship there. I think that's really nice writing. By the way, I called that double fake out thing with the envy thing. I called that at the end of the episode. You can't trick me, show. Winry is another character that I like, and I think the show really did as much with her as they could. Her and Edward obviously like each other a lot, and I think she sort of ends up standing in for the people of the country for Edward, you know what I mean? Edward has a lot of people he cares about and wants to save, but Winry is the one that isn't involved in the main plot, that he still loves and wants to protect, that isn't in the fight. He's fighting for everyone around him, but he's fighting for her too, and with Winry just being a mechanic, I think that's a good enough use for her, but I also wish she got some more screen time and got to be around Edward and Alphonse more. I was surprised when the show ended and we didn't get a revelation of feelings for each other between Ed and Winry, or a kiss, but I think the photo of their future family during the closing credits was a great final touch. I like that a lot. I never really found a moment to place this comment anywhere across all of these reviews, but does anyone else find it strange just how often members of the upper staff of the government are brought up for one or two scenes here and there and then are just dropped? Then a few episodes later there's another one and then it happens again and again. I guess it's pretty effective in showing how large the establishment really is and how many people are against the main cast, but I always found myself thinking, okay, well now who's this guy whenever it happened? And a lot of the time they didn't really matter. Anyway, who else? The Armstrongs? Like I said, the Major beat me into submission. He's fine, but I don't really see myself liking the General very much. He's just not really my kind of character. Wait, oh yeah, Teacher. What the fuck is Teacher doing here? You know what I mean? Like, they're aware of the sacrifice plan. They're aware Teacher is planned to be one of them. Why the hell is she even in the country, let alone the capital? If they just sent her away to the desert or Shing or something for the day, Father's plan is thwarted, right? Or I guess any of them. You could do it with Ed or Al or Hohenheim too, but they're kind of in the shit, you know what I mean? They're involved. Teacher, though, she's got no skin in the game. Send her ass out for a day. And then the issue is at least diverted, right? If not outright solved. All that being said, I like Teacher. I'm glad she was here. Always a pleasure. Scar was one of my favorite characters around the middle of the series. I found his point of view of doling out vengeance and knowing what he was doing wasn't right or good in the traditional sense, but his own view of justice overrode that logic, and he was aware that eventually that life would lead him to his death. This horrible mindset would be applied to him eventually. And with where Scar ends up, I like the direction he went in, but I'm not sure if I entirely love the route he took to get there. His scope was narrowed to attacking instead of every single state alchemist he sees. He instead focuses on the real evil that caused the near extinction of his people, that being the upper brass of the government and Father. Him learning new things and changing his target, but his overall goal of avenging his people staying the same is entirely logical, and I get that completely. But what was so interesting about Scar, to me at least, gets lost in that transition. He learns of these things and is shown compassion, but he doesn't really have much trouble flipping sides. Once his side is flipped, he sort of just becomes part of the team. He doesn't have much agency of his own that isn't also just the agency of the group as a whole. And that's what was so interesting about Scar to me, his motivation and his skewed vision of justice. So when he doesn't seem to have much trouble in getting over those elements of his mindset that seem to be dominating his life, I just feel like he could have been used for so much more interesting stuff. I don't mind at all Scar ending up where he does with a better outlook, wanting to help change the world and help Mustang rebuild his nation. I like that a lot for him, but I think somewhere in the middle there, if he had a harder time changing his views, was more chained to his thoughts of disgust and hatred, and then overcame them to become the better version of himself, that would have worked a lot better for me. Moving right on up the ladder of importance, next is Mustang, who was another character that I liked for the whole run, but ended up liking him even more as the show closed out. Him getting his vision stolen and not being broken by it and still fighting and wanting to make the world a better place is great, and him finally learning that Envy was the one who killed his friend and humbling them so viciously was amazing. There is something I don't agree with the show on when it comes to Mustang though. When Mustang is about to kill Envy, finally really kill them, his friends stop them. Edward and Hawkeye both tell him that killing Envy in rage and for revenge isn't something that he would do. And for me, that moment just seems a little hokey. Mustang has always been an extremely decisive character, no qualms in using violence or trickery or whatever to do what he believes is the correct thing to do. And everyone around him, up until now, has been pretty alright with him doing whatever he needs to do. But Edward and Hawkeye reason that if he kills envy and anger, then that's a sign he won't be a good leader for the country, or he won't be able to take it back. With Edward, I suppose the logic is that Edward seems to respect and want to preserve basically all life. He doesn't even want to kill the homunculi soldiers. And Hawkeye doesn't want to see her best friend do something so brutal in anger. And I get that they both bring these perspectives when wanting to talk down Mustang, but maybe I'm just a bad person because of this, but I agree with angry Mustang. Hawkeye even says that she'll kill Envy for him, so it's not like Envy's getting out of this anyway. And I think Mustang is more than justified in killing Envy and anger for everything they've done, and especially for killing his friend Hughes and then laughing about it. His anger is extremely well placed and justified, and anger as a human isn't always bad. It often is, but when it's placed like this, pointed at a monster that did personal damage to you and is actively taking part in the killing of 50 million people, I don't know if the lesson of a leader shouldn't act in anger really sticks for me. I don't think blasting Envy one final time would have changed Mustang for the worse here at all, and the show implying that it would missed pretty big time for me. Though I don't agree with the lesson the show is trying to teach me, Mustang relenting and agreeing with his friends on its own in a vacuum wasn't all that bad. That's his decision as a character to make after all, but the idea just wasn't my favorite. Other than that little hurdle, Mustang is probably safely in my top 5 characters. There's just a confidence to him that I like, a lot of no-nonsense to him that I think won me over early on in the show because the show needed it when it was a lot goofier. But he also has this cute little dynamic with Hawkeye and does have a little bit of fun here and there too. Yeah, Mustang just kind of rules. It's funny, you start this show and you see a lot of the world through Edward's eyes, and because of that you see Hoenheim as this awful, imposing father who gave up on his family. And you think he's gonna be more of an antagonist than anything, even before the reveal that him and father are two different beings. Which I think is a big part of why it feels so novel when Hoenheim ends up being basically a main character. Really, this entire show past the halfway point is Hoenheim's story, and Edward and Alphonse are just caught up in it. And it's a really cool feeling seeing Hoenheim go from what you assume he is in your brain to what he actually is, which is maybe the biggest hero in the entire show. Without him, father would have just became God and then did whatever he wanted to do while being a god. He goes from this giant scary figure into this soft-spoken, introspective, sort of softy when you learn more about him. He's a really likable guy that knows he was instrumental in some really bad shit that's about to go down, has a really interesting backstory and extremely interesting ties to both sides of the conflict in his relationship to all of the homunculi and Edward and Alphonse. The entire story swings around the axis that is Hoenheim, and when the show started, I really wasn't expecting that. And yes, thank you all for the spoilers that this was indeed Hoenheim in opening 1. Do you know how many people just blasted off and saying that while I was still 20 plus episodes away from possibly being able to realize that? I think the logic is that he dies because he used all of the souls that were inside him from Xerxes to make all of the Philosopher's Stones to counter Father's plans, right? So then his body starts rapidly failing. That was another one I had to think about, but I think that's probably it. Him dying in the end is an appropriate bookend for that entire story. The one thing I wish there was a little bit more of for Hoenheim is a bit more of a relationship with Edward in the end, though. I thought they'd come around to more even ground, and that would have been a great big moment for mostly Ed, but the show didn't go in that direction. I know Edward called him his father in an outburst, but I was hoping for more. This entire conflict is Hoenheim. So father, all of the homunculi, everything that has to do with that centuries-old conflict, including Hoenheim, all dying in the end is cool with me, even though I ended up liking the guy a lot. Though, now that I think about it, does that mean there are just 6 Philosopher's Stones laying on the ground on the edges of the country? And finally, Debais, Edward and Alphonse, and the theme of self-sacrifice. With this last run of episodes not really focusing in on our main characters until the last 4 or 5 or so, my theory on them being basically where they were going to end up being character-wise was proven correct. And that's not a bad thing, as I discussed last video. I think Alphonse and Edward both have had decent little character arcs, though they may have been a little low-key for some people's taste. I didn't mind too much. But with the show finally closing out, where did they leave our 2 main characters? Well, I don't think you can talk about that without talking about the theme that has permeated the entire show, which is self-sacrifice. Doing good for another, or perhaps many others, to the detriment of yourself. It goes all the way back to the start, with the first human transmutation they tried to do. Edward unknowingly transmutes Al and sacrifices an arm and a leg to bring a soul back. Over and over this theme is explored. Alphonse willingly blocks horrible damage for people that can't defend themselves. Scar puts aside his feelings of hatred towards the Emestrians to help them. Mustang wants to assume the role as Fuhrer so he can try the war criminals from the Ishval conflict, including himself. Alphonse realizing that the greater good is more important and using a Philosopher's Stone even though he swore he never would. Alphonse gives up his connection to the armor to buy back Edward's arm in the last moments of the final battle. Hoenheim is willing to give up his life and body to bring Alphonse back. Edward gives up his ability to interact with alchemy to buy Alphonse's body back. All of these moments, and even more I haven't mentioned, are all because our characters see their own well-being as secondary to someone else's. Their selflessness in achieving their goals is the biggest thing that separates them from Father. Father constantly uses others to achieve his goals, whether it be the souls of the countries he's planning to sacrifice or the lives of his homunculus children. In the end, he's only looking out for himself. He is singular. No matter how many souls he absorbs, how many people he literally takes into his being, he is still infinitely less than our main cast because they have each other's backs. They might not do anything to win, but they will do anything to make sure their friends have the chance to win. And that's why Father loses. He can't do it all. He can't keep up with everyone, and everyone is there because of the strength of the character of our main characters. Edward and Alphonse, and the love they have for each other, the fact that they will sacrifice themselves for something they believe in, rather than sacrificing others for something they want. And I think that's the cherry atop both of their characters to end this series out. They don't need to have giant revelations or massive twists. They just reach the epitome of what they are. They are their greatest, most genuine selves as the show reaches its climax. I think that's pretty sick. Like when Edward punched someone who was an all-powerful god a minute ago, and as far as he knows is still unknowably strong, and he says, "Get up, you novice." That was so sick. I was like, what the fuck? Edward's right. Everything Father has or has learned has been stolen. Edward has worked for all of his knowledge and strength. The two coming to blows are the two ways the show is set up to grow strong coming to blows, and Edward's winning out. This fight is selflessness versus selfishness. It's hard work versus taking the easy way out, and it's Edward versus Father. Oh, by the way, the reference shot to opening 2, chef's kiss. I think the climax captures perfectly what this show did so well with writing these two characters, and I think their endings were very nice, the both of them. I'll never get used to Alphonse's voice not having an echo to it, but my therapist's not going to work that out later. I love the fact that they go their own separate ways to end it. I felt a lot in this show that Alphonse, though being interesting and important, never really had enough to do. He was always in Edward's shadow, and even in the times he and Edward did split up, it was still always Edward who had the more plot important stuff going on. Alphonse going east to Xing and Edward going west, both of them to learn more, really gave me the feeling that they had both come into their own over the course of this show. They're still brothers and still love each other, but these experiences have made them grow, both metaphorically and physically, and they can go it alone. They're strong enough to be apart, and they'll probably be better people for it in the future. Alphonse having his own story and adventure is something I really like for that character. It's the same with Edward, but he was already so headstrong and confident, but it's still a direction I like for him. This very well could have been the adventure of their lives, but their stories aren't over. There are still things Edward wants to learn and do. It feels like an ending, but it also feels like a new beginning. Going into the show, how was I not supposed to know how highly it was regarded? Most people who've seen it say this is one of the best anime out there, and I went in with open arms. I'd seen chunks of it, as you know, but the entire story was still a mystery to me. While yes, just like any other show, it has problems, and just like any other show I watch, I'm gonna have my own unique problems I take away from it. Those problems are heavily outweighed by the good. Unique and interesting characters, a unique and interesting world full of different peoples and conflicts and histories and myths and mysteries, and I really wasn't expecting for this whole thing to be basically one grand mystery. I'm not sure if I've ever watched a show like this that has just been one giant overarching question of what the hell is the main villain even doing? And while we're trying to answer that question, there are a bunch of smaller, though still important conflicts to solve. For me, it's such a new way for a show to handle things. I don't think I was even really prepared to view it in a way that it should be viewed. I kept thinking, wow, this show keeps posing more questions than it answers, and really worried about how it was going to tie it all up. But that's what the show was going for, that giant reveal at the end, and I really wasn't going in expecting to have to be ready for that. I like the show a lot, and this isn't supposed to be a dig or anything at it at all, but it strikes me as a show that's probably better upon a second watch through. So you can see the dots connected together, realize foreshadowing that went over your head, notice lines and hints that are there, but you don't know that are important. Even without that second watch through under my belt, I can see why this show is so highly regarded. When the show takes itself seriously, like it does the vast majority of the time outside of the opening handful of episodes, I think it has a great niche it places itself in of action-filled with a tad too much anime humor for me, but also politically and mostly story-driven, while also never forgetting the characters either. I think it does most everything of what it's trying to do very well, with only the occasional stumble here and there. I think Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a very good show. Patreon shoutouts. If you want to see a brand new video from me, head to YouTube Release. You can support me on Patreon for just a few bucks. Link, as always, is in the description below the video. Biggest shoutouts of all go to my top patrons. Blanco, who found a glowing book that was 4 stories tall, and after touching it has gained encyclopedic knowledge of everything. Kevin Bartlett, who sired an heir to the royal family to a species of interdimensional aliens to form a peace treaty. They named it Brett. Liquor cause I know her, who was the first person to encounter a time hurricane and only come out a week older, but it's still technically happening to him and not happening to him because of weird time meteorology, so who knows if he's still in there or not. Potato Scream, who can shout an entire orchestra, all of the instruments at once. Sane Expedite, who survived a firing squad because they simply tanked all of the bullets they had on hand. Sam Udatong, who broke both the limbo and high jump world records right after each other, making them the human master of verticality. The former meaning of life, who can actually throw a pistol and it works as a flash grenade, like for real. The 1AM party, who unlike Newton, can turn other metals into gold and will not die if they eat mercury. Trendkill, who figured out they are actually a brain in a jar hooked up to a computer because when they astral projected, that's what they saw, which means that me and whoever's watching this, Trendkill is probably the only real person. And Whitrow, who is immune to propaganda, unless they believe that, in which case they are not. And of course, my other fuck you money patrons, a flock of Plancakes, A2AX Phoenix, Anthony Collins, Insomnite, Creffin, Midnight Balzons, and Tater or Tots. And my god overanalyzers, Two Boots Are Beat, Ang, Andrew Watchert, Blade Dancer, Bunniverse, Carlo Wren, Cosmic Newbie, Danny Stevens, Dr. Xerox, Dominic Saint, Emma on Emma, Aaron Grace, Jackson, Jeremy Rubenstein, John Warhammer, Kirill Magnus, Matt, Marshall Rather, Matthew Lang, Michael Fellon, Mitchell Gobrecht, Nick, Nicholas Abbott, Oathkeeper 13, Peter Baron, Philip Jindra, Rocket Mist, Ryan Maxwell, Scoobert, Shane Antonacci, Smarty Marty, Princess Useless Backwards, Super Snipper, That Blind Ginger, and some kind of bear face. What the fuck even is? Oh no. Next up, I want to watch more Freerun.